Hi, good evening, everyone. How are you? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank goodness I have a microphone. I teach for a living, you may or may not know, and I'm used to kind of yelling in a room, but this would be a little bit of a challenge to try to get through this sound wave. But thank you for being here. I hope you're having a fantastic festival so far, if you've been a part of it. My wife Jennifer and I flew in a couple of days ago. We live in Florida, and I've made a living there and a life there. I teach at Stetson University. Just a few minutes about my life. At the age of 40, I had a professional midlife crisis, and I, in addition to being a tenured professor of mathematics at Stetson University, decided to enter culinary school, and so I attended culinary school in the evening program at Le Cordon Bleu in Orlando, and a year later graduated. And anyway, here we are almost 18 years later. Jennifer and I opened a restaurant in small downtown DeLand in the year 2008 because I'm not a very good investor, so it was the worst time to open a new business, but we went for it anyway, and we made a life of it, and sold it pre-pandemic to owners who are taking good care of it. But I haven't stopped cooking professionally, and I write prolifically, hopefully well. So I'm not sure about the system by which you might have access to the book, but I'm glad you're here. Thank you for being here. Jennifer and I were in Marrakech, not long ago, about 2 or 3 years ago. And so we firsthand, of course, experienced the fantastic cuisine of Morocco, having already tasted it many times before that. How many of you have been to Morocco? It's not a prerequisite by no means, but so wonderful. So you already know. And so you all maybe are aware of the dish B'steeya. There are many ways of pronouncing it. Traditionally, it's a baked. It's a festive dish, right? So it's not an everyday dish, and it's made with a dough that goes by many names. Warka is one of them. It's sort of like a phyllo, but it's not really. It's certainly vegan. It's plant-based. In the restaurant, when we opened, the vegetarian option on the menu was the B'steeya in a slightly different form, and was widely received. And our little sleepy town didn't know what to make of that dish, and in a good way. And so they were very excited to have flavors like that. I'm pleased to bring it to you. Now, being the chef that I am, I'm not just making you a B'steeya, but I'm trying to compose an entire entree for you. And so the way I think about food when it comes to composed dishes is this notion of balancing flavors. And we can only taste so many things as human beings. And so for me, it's a matter of not deconstructing the flavors, but rather layering the flavors from start to finish in terms of the components themselves, but also in the way you eat it and consume it. And so my hope, at least in my little crazy head, is that as you go through the dish, whether it's with your hands or with silverware, that you will find some surprises. It's not uncommon for me to hide surprises at the very bottom of my pile of food, and hopefully good surprises. So today's dish is no different. I've hidden something underneath the B'steeya, and I will tell you more about that later. So, without further ado, the B'steeya is a filled pastry, and traditionally it's made with squab, pigeon actually. So pigeon B'steeya is the most traditional B'steeya in Morocco. Nowadays, of course, chicken is a good substitute, and duck even, maybe even turkey. But not many places go the vegetarian route. Now, we had vegetarian B'steeya in Marrakech, and I don't want to say too many things other than it was not particularly thoughtful. I'll be honest with you. Because they didn't know what to do if you're not going to put meat in it, right? It was very perplexing for the chef. So my hope is that the version you're going to taste that we'll probably start plating in the next few minutes or so with a fantastic tea back there will give you a sense of what is possible. And when it comes to plant-based food, the book that I have there is a vegetarian book, so it's not entirely plant-based. There's some dairy and eggs in there, but about 80% of the book is plant-based. This version is not plant-based only because of a touch of cream in one of the sauces and the use of puff pastry as opposed to warka, right? So beyond that, you can certainly make it easily make it plant-based. So the filling is this. It's inspired by when I think of Moroccan food. I think of this balance of sweet, savory, spice, acidity, and some heat, but not a lot of heat, right? And so that's where I'm going with this filling. So what's in my filling in the back there, once you receive the tasting portion, I'll tell you more about that. But what I'm going to do here is start with, I've always joked about this. When I start cooking, whether it's at home or in a professional setting, I first find an onion, I cut it, and then I try to think about where I'm going to go with this dish. So today is no different. I'm going to slice this onion, and we'll figure out where we're going to go with this. So onions, ginger, garlic form the first level of flavor, right, in the filling. So in this pan, I'll try to make the filling. And it's going to evolve as it goes. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. Full disclosure, this oven is not the best for today, so I'm not able to really bake it a la minute for you. I just did it maybe 30 minutes ago in the back kitchen, so you can be assured that it's really fresh. But I'll show you the form and the makeup of the pastry, but then we'll do that. Imagine this going in an oven, and imagine 30 minutes later this is what happens. So, sliced onions, red onions, because I like the natural sweetness of red onions. So this pan is for the filling, okay? In here goes all sorts of vegetables of the season, but what makes it a really rich filling at the end of the day, when time happens and when the onions caramelize and when the aromatics come together, is the use of something with substance and sort of body. And for me, that's a whole bunch of mushrooms, all sorts of mushrooms, right? I'm not a big fan of, there's a place and there's a time for it, but I'm not a big fan of trying to sneak in plant-based alternatives of meat into the filling. I mean, you could do that, but I don't think it's necessary. Certainly, if you want the protein, you can evolve the protein. You'll see where I've used the protein today. It's in a component that I'm not able to show you, but I'll certainly talk about. By the way, that recipe that's in front of you looks perhaps exhausting, and it's all I could fit. It's all that I could fit on the page. It doesn't mean that's the full recipe. Just like this is all that I could fit on the sheet tray. It doesn't mean I could not use more ingredients. Okay, so ginger, garlic, onions. Okay, that's the starting level of the filling. In this pan, I'm going to show you the beginnings of what you might think of as a prototypical North Indian tomato cream-based masala sauce. So you could think of it as a tikka masala. You could think of it as a korma with more tomatoes than nuts. You can think of it as just straight brown gravy. So this masala cream is essentially a very familiar North Indian, I'll put this in quotations, curry sauce, right? So we can call it tikka masala. We can just call it plain masala. So I'm calling it masala cream for that reason. Well, guess what? It's the exact same beginning. Onions, ginger, and garlic, because why not? You might notice that the onions were cut slightly differently. This sauce will be completely blended, in theory, into a nice smooth sauce. This is a rough and composed kind of a compote that kind of cools down in the refrigerator, comes together, and then it becomes part of the filling. So I want some more texture in the filling. I don't really so much care about texture in the sauce. It's all going to be blended. Now, a bit about spices. The book is Dreaming in Spice. I do dream in spice. I mean, you could argue I dream in color. I don't know how many of you dream in color. But I certainly dream in spice, in the sense that it's quite the diverse set of emotions, and sometimes they're pungent, and sometimes they're acrid, and sometimes they're sweet, and sometimes they're fragrant. So in that vein, typically you would start with whole spices. You see that recipe in front of you, but I'm just going to show you the version with ground spices. So I'm going to bloom the spices in the oil. It's just extra virgin olive oil. It's not ghee. It's not butter. It's not duck fat. You could certainly do all of those things. I don't think it's necessary. I always joke about chefs who try to make vegetarian dishes and then they're perplexed when the traditional version starts with caul fat or bacon or salt pork or some other kind of animal-based fat, even butter. Well, if that's the prominent flavor, then yes, but hopefully that's not the prominent flavor. There's more to it. So for me, yes, there's a place for all those kinds of things. I'm just going to cut this down a little bit. But there is, for example, there's no reason to start in an animal fat if your dish is largely vegetarian. So let me explain about that a little bit. I said this to the Uber driver just yesterday, who helped me around town and got me from point A to point B. he mentioned to me that he was vegan and he was trying that lifestyle out. And so I couldn't help myself, and I said to him, you know, in my opinion, 99% of flavor in food comes from plants. Try eating fish without anything else on it. Try eating meat without anything else on it. Try eating poultry without anything else on it. You could enjoy that for a little bit, but after a while you're going to be craving some flavor. And that flavor almost always comes from a plant. Yes, you could argue salt is a seasoning. I'll give you salt. But beyond that, the aromatics, the marinades, the chutneys, the herbs, the acidity, the spices for sure, they're all plants. So here we are, bad-mouthing plant-based food when a lot of the flavor of food comes from plants. So it's kind of an enigma to me. And so I feel like it needs to, that narrative needs to change a little bit. Is we have to lead with the idea that plant-based food is not flavorless, but rather it's what flavor is. So, onions, garlic, and ginger in both of these pans. The spices in the masala cream are going to just be simply cinnamon, turmeric, cumin, coriander, cayenne, and a bay leaf. Okay, simple. We're just going to bloom the spices. To bloom spices is to sort of allow the essential oils of the spices to become extracted into the fat medium. And that's what gives the deep flavor in a spiced dish. So, for example, it's not uncommon for folks to add spices to a simmering pot of liquid, whether it be a chili or a marinara or some other kind of sauce, as it's simmering away. There's a place for that. But that addition of spices, in my opinion, doesn't really give the depth of flavor. The depth of flavor comes from, guess what? Like you slice garlic very thinly and you infuse the oil and then you start making your dish. The same way, you start with some oil in the pan. Unfortunately, it has to be oil. Water doesn't do it. And then you start with the spices in the warm oil. And once that blooming happens, then you can layer your flavors as much as you want. And it's an entirely different outcome than just adding spices sort of as you're going. So the blooming of spices is an essential step in cooking with spices, in my opinion. Okay, so to make this filling, I have some rhubarb here and some garlic chives. And I'm just going to think to see what else I'm going to add here. A little bit of salt. A different set of spices. This is the B'steeya filling. So allspice, cinnamon, cardamom, and fenugreek is essentially what's in here. And there's some other things you'll see in the recipe. But that's essentially what goes in here. Again, this is still the blooming stage, right? We probably will not have the real time to create the depth of flavor you need, but you get the gist of it. Okay, you can see the color of the oil change here, probably. Yes, ma'am. How long would I do this step? It depends on if you're watching it or not. If you don't want to watch it and you want it low and slow, maybe 20, 30 minutes. But if you're in front of it, you could expedite it to up to as little as 10 minutes, easily. Okay, now, these are the surprising ingredients in the B'steeya filling, right? We're in the Mediterranean, we're in North Africa, bordering the Mediterranean. So olives. Normally you wouldn't cook with olives, but you're just going to warm the olives a little bit to infuse the flavor. Dried fruit. I just have cranberries here, but prunes, figs, apricots, raisins, they're all candidates. I just have dried cranberries. Some nuts, almonds, walnuts, cashews, whatever you like. Tomatoes, fresh, and Masaro Farms last season's canned tomato. So I want to thank them for their wonderful produce that they gave us to work with. Do you all shop at Masaro Farm? You're aware? Wonderful. Steve has been fantastic. I really can't thank him enough. That's the thing about food. I mean, yes, I'm cooking for you, fine, but I've now met so many fantastic folks who I think I'll have relationships for probably the rest of my life. So it's just incredible what food can provide. quick show of hands, how many of you prefer plant-forward dining, or you're interested? I might be speaking to the choir here, so I appreciate that very much. Fantastic. Okay, now for the depth of flavor in the curry sauce. More tomatoes. Just like when you give a presentation in mathematics, I learned this a long time ago. When I go to conferences and I present my research on whatever it is, my advisor in graduate school told me a long time ago that it's customary to always provide at least one proof, at least one theorem and proof, right? It's not a mathematics talk if you haven't presented at least one proof. Likewise, it isn't a cooking demonstration if you haven't cut something on a cutting board. So, in that tradition, let me do a tomato this time. I wish I could say this is a local tomato, but I think the season has just kind of passed. I went to Elm Street Market and got these tomatoes. So the other thing Jennifer are very good at is supporting local businesses when we travel, and we have eaten our way through New Haven the short time we've been here. Breakfast this morning was Moderna pizza, for example. That was our breakfast. As soon as we landed, we went to Barcelona Wine and Bar right next to the hotel. And then the pita place across the street, and then Sher Khan last night for dinner. There were a couple other meals in there. There's somewhere tonight, Zinc, I think, tonight. So support your local festivals because you get outsiders to come in and we have a good time here. Again, the same tomato from last season because I want more tomato in that sauce. The one thing you may have noticed I haven't done so far is taste the food. This is as important as anything else you could do with food is to taste as you go. At the restaurant, I was obsessive about this requirement of all of my staff is to taste everything. Nothing's an experiment. You get one chance to make an impression because what that guest tastes is what they think is your best effort, and so it has to be best effort. So there are no standardized recipes in my kitchen, and so you kind of taste as you go. And frankly, even standardized recipes, you can all appreciate this perhaps. This is the scientist in me. That, when something calls for a tomato, what kind of tomato is it? Is it that Publix tomato that was in a ripening room for 4 months before it came on the shelf? Or is it an heirloom tomato in the peak of the season? One tomato doesn't mean anything unless I know more information. So standardized recipes are a little bit challenging. But, big food has a way of controlling flavor and using preservatives to hold the food chemistry at a certain level. And so then standardization of recipes makes sense, of course, because these are large industrial processes, and it's not little mom-and-pop cooking like I'm used to. Are there any other questions so far? So let me talk about the components on this dish. We have this filling that's happening. So just to recap, onions, ginger, garlic, some spices, allspice, cinnamon, cardamom, fenugreek, maybe some turmeric, some cumin, olives, nuts, dried fruit, and from Masara Farm I had these garlic chives are in here because I have them, not because it's part of something I would normally do. Now, right now the flavor profile of this filling is more on the acidic side. I don't even have to taste it, I already know. It's salty, acidic, right? So I got to bring it back a little bit. The fruit provides some respite, but you still have to bring it to the middle a little bit. I want that filling to be intense but balanced at the same time. A little bit of light brown sugar. You could use honey or some other kind of natural sugar if you want. This kind of sweetener if you wanted. It smells good, actually. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. It's gonna be hard for me to hear that. Yes. So let me do something before I answer that question. The other thing I'm going to add in here is so typically when I make the B'steeya filling, I add preserved lemons as well as whole oranges. So I have the brininess, the brine from the olives, and I'm now going to add fresh citrus juice along with the zest, right? So this is to me a fresh acid. It's fresh acid. It's not acetic acid. It's not vinegar yet. But I'm going to actually add some vinegar. And vinegar has the propensity to really caramelize, because it also vinegar also has some sugar components to it. So when you cook with vinegar and you intensify it, it sort of gets gelatinous a little bit. The natural sugars sort of come together and they crystallize a little bit. So even though I'm going to taste this, I'm going to answer that question. What do I taste? Yes, it's very acidic in a natural way. The citrus notes are prominent right now. I would need more sugar. I would need some honey. I would need more dried fruit. So I'm tasting for, is it an acetic acid kind of acid or is it a citric acid kind of acid? And there's a difference, clearly. One is fermented, one is unfermented. And I personally am a fan of the citric acid, the fresh citrus. There's a place for vinegar, and I use it a lot in dressings and accents. But if I just taste vinegar up front, it kind of stops me a little bit. So in this dish, I don't want that to happen. I want it to be mostly a fresh citrus, because if you've been to Morocco, you know that citrus is everywhere. The oranges are everywhere. And there's a reason why preserved lemons are used widely in the cuisine, because fresh citrus is what's predominantly used rather than vinegars. Very different from Provence, very different from Spain, which are just across the sea, you know. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I try to balance the acid depending on the kind of acid that it is. The source of the acidity before the citrus was primarily the so maybe I was preemptive, right? So I think the acidity came from adding the citrus now, right? But at the end of the day, maybe this is what I'm trying to say. At the end of the day, that filling needs to be balanced in terms of fresh citrus notes and the sugary components of the dried fruit and the brown sugar. So you're absolutely correct. In when I mentioned acidity, I hadn't added citrus yet, but it was certainly briny. There were olives already in there, right? So it's briny in the sense that of the way olives are briny. It's all to be honest, olives have the tannins and they have the salt. So I was also trying to balance that. Some, if they're good tomatoes, absolutely. That's a great question. It's the quality of spices. You know, you all know about how to bring spices back to life by toasting them in a dry pan or a cast iron skillet on a low heat, because those essential oils tend to come out a little bit. In terms of um, what's good enough, well, it depends on the application. I'm just adding some water to kind of deglaze the pan. In a given application, if you're trying to make the spices be the stars, then yes, you want to reach for those high quality fresh spices. Fresh spices are a slight oxymoron in my opinion, because spices travel a long distance to come to your shelves. So to really claim that a spice is fresh is kind of asking for a lot. Now, there are spices that are higher quality and have a better transportation through the supply chains. They've been preserved better along the way, but they're not really fresh in the true sense of the word. That's the very nature. They're dried almost always. They're preserved for a reason. So in terms of certain spices you can smell. They're meant to be aromatic spices for a reason. You know, the cardamom you should be able to smell. Cinnamon you should smell. Clove you should smell. Allspice you should smell when you compromise it a little bit. And cumin seed and coriander seed, those are spices you should have the fragrance. But a mustard seed, you know, you don't really smell a mustard seed. A bay leaf, yes, a fresh bay leaf you smell, but a dried bay leaf is you don't really smell a dried bay leaf. So they all have a place in that layering of flavors that ultimately becomes the dish that's spiced. But the freshness, I don't think it's necessary to obsess about the freshness of the spices, especially if they're meant to be part of a sauce. But if you're toasting, and this is very common in Indian cuisine, if you're toasting a ground spice like a ground cumin or ground black pepper or ground cardamom or ground coriander, it helps to have that spice be somewhat fragrant still. And then when you toast it a la menu, just a dry toasting, it really perfumes the dish and provides that excitement that you're looking for. But if a spice is meant to be part of a sauce, I think you can get away with really any spice. You know, of course, you use more of some than others if they've kind of gone flat, and that's okay because ultimately it's the chemistry. How many of those flavor compounds do you need to make that flavor? So if something has lost its intensity through the chemistry that happens with shelf life, then you just add more of it, and by volume you may get the same amount of flavor compounds. Is the best answer I can think of in the moment. Okay, so this sauce is a little bit more salt, and now it's time to add a little heat. This is just a fresh chili pepper, and this is going to go in the masala cream. Look at that. I like to add fresh chilies in masala sauces as opposed to cayenne pepper because the cayenne pepper is kind of a front heat pepper, and it's not particularly deep in my opinion. But when you cook with a green pepper and it gives out its capsaicin, its seeds, and all of its freshness into a sauce, and then you blend that, Mexican cuisine does a masterful job of cooking with fresh peppers in sauces, and I'm a fan of that way of using heat. We grow a plethora of sauces we grow a plethora of peppers in our garden. My first garden in my life, first time this past year, has done really well. We have anything from the Carolina Reaper, lots of them, all the way to really gentle Hungarian wax peppers. We have a spectrum of about 15 different peppers in our garden, and we use them all for all sorts of things. So the masala cream is very simple. Yes, ma'am. I can't hear anything back there. I'm sorry. I like the heat of peppers. I always recommend the entire pepper, except perhaps the stem. So I don't shy away from the seeds personally. A lot of chefs, when they do cooking demos on TV, will take the seeds out and they'll dice the skin of the pepper. I'm like, okay. But so there's a place for that because that provides the capsicum, the capsaicin, but not the heat. Provides that that vegetal flavor of a pepper, but it doesn't provide the capsaicin necessarily. I like both. I like them both. I'm sorry. The seed. It still has the, yeah, I agree. In the perfect world, I agree. But you know, we get quote unquote jalapeno peppers in the grocery store, and it's false advertising all the way through. Because I'm expecting a certain amount of heat of the jalapeno, and it's not there. And you know this. I mean, the agricultural industry in this country they've hybridized everything, including peppers. So when you see a basket of jalapeno peppers in one store and you compare it with another store, it's night and day sometimes, and it's the same species theoretically, but which farm and which seed, you know, and what growing conditions and what sort of sunlight, and it changes the heat quality of the pepper. I like heat. You're gonna taste some of that on your dish today. Not too much. Hopefully it's balanced because there's some other components that balances the whole dish. Okay, so this is good in terms of the base sauce. A touch of heavy cream. And this gets blended. This gets blended to a smooth sauce, and that's what you're going to see on your plate. So underneath the b'steeya, at the very bottom, you see this orange sort of sauce. It's my masala cream in the way I made it for you here. Okay? The filling, I'm going to taste before I accept it as being good enough. It's not bad considering I just sort of half ate it over here. But It's not bad, actually. It's pretty close to what I would normally use. You're going to find a little bit more complexity in your version because I had the ability to control what was happening. Now, last but not least, some chopped fresh herbs in here. So just to recap, this vegetarian version would have all the aromatics of a B'steeya and then some. The spices a little bit more forward. The deep mushrooms, which I haven't used here, but they are in your version, roasted down. Lots of nuts, lots of fruit. It gives you this really, some of you are into it. Let me know what you think. Good? Nice, thank you. So let me talk a little bit about what you're being presented. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So on what you're having, some of you received it, some of you haven't. There's several components. There's at the very bottom of the plate is the masala cream. The puff pastry filled B'steeya sits between the sauce, sits on top of the sauce, but underneath the B'steeya and the sauce are two other components. One is roasted farro, tossed with a little garlic chives and rhubarb from Masaro Farm. Also a layer of fresh collard greens that he gave me that I just lightly sauteed, and I sort of tossed with some citrus zest. Speaking of citrus and zest, every piece of citrus I've ever used in recent memory, I begin handling it by first zesting the citrus. You first get the good outer zest. Store it whether you need it or not. And then you get your juice, and then the rest of the citrus, you take the seeds away, and I use the rest of the citrus in cooking down. I love cooked citrus in dishes. It's a hallmark of Persian cuisine, is to use fresh citrus that's been dried citrus that's been rehydrated and perfumes all sorts of dishes, right? So I love that idea of taking the entire citrus, zested first, juiced, seeded, and then the rest of it, pith and core and membrane and everything, cook it down in gravies, cook it down in pasta sauces, cook it down in whole grains, cook it down in rice dishes, all sorts of things. And I personally like to take that cooked citrus, chop it up, and then fold it back into the dish. So those slight bitter notes and citrus notes are something I personally enjoy. But it provides you all of the nutrition of the citrus and provides you the actual depth of flavor that citrus really is. Because a lot of people just think citrus is for the juice. And maybe the zest if you get really creative. But frankly, the entire fruit has a place in the culinary world. And I try to take full advantage of it. And Persian cuisine, as I mentioned, does a masterful job of that. So I like to channel that. So that's it. That's the masala cream. This is the B'steeya filling. Let me show you how to make the pastry. It's a little piece of puff pastry that I've been saving here just for this part of the demo. And I actually have the same B'steeya filling that it's in your version in this little finished version over here. So this is kind of warm, right? It needs to cool down. Pastry having some butter would not be happy with that. It's very simple makeup. In the center, can you all see this? Am I in the frame? Yeah. It's simple. Do not egg wash it just yet. Right? It's not like ravioli. You just bring it together, bring it together, bring it together. Right now it looks like a wonton, but then pick it up. Balance it with your hands. Don't let it hang or it's going to tear. Just sort of pinch it and bring it together. Remember, this is the downside, the part you don't see. Pinch it, turn it upside down, and now shape it to any shape you want. Rectangles, rounds, whatever. Egg wash. Pat it down just a hair. Egg wash all the way around. 400-degree oven, maybe 20 minutes. Keep an eye on it. 25 minutes maximum. It's ready to go. That's it. Now imagine the possibilities. This is a B'steeya. You all make pastries. You use puff pastries for all sorts of things. How many of you use puff pastry for a savory application that's not a beef Wellington or some sort of a mushroom Wellington? Do you use puff pastry for savory applications? If you don't mind the butter in puff pastry, go for it. If you do, wonderful. What do you like to put in it? Spinach pie, fantastic. Uh, it's a great summer idea, right? If you don't mind puff pastry, it's a great summer idea because in the summer you want lighter dishes. So a spinach pie, a tomato pie that's cooked down, mushroom pies, all sorts of things, open tartines, and so on and so forth. But to actually completely enclose it as I did here, and then give it an egg wash, bake it all, it comes out as an individual portion for your guest. And just now imagine the possibilities. You could put all sorts of things in there. You provide a little sauce and some nice fresh salad, and that's a meal that tastes different every time the filling changes. Because the puff pastry is extremely chef-friendly. They've perfected it. It's really, unlike phyllo dough, which is a little more challenging to work with. But puff pastries, now of course if you're plant-based and you can't have the butter, I understand, then you have to find an alternative pastry of some kind. There are many options out there. I think Pepperidge Farm, I'm not trying to promote them at all, makes a plant-based version of puff pastry. So I suspect it's got all sorts of other oils in it, but it's not necessarily healthier, but it does not use dairy in my opinion. So that's the filling. That's the makeup. That's the filling. Now, one more component on your dish. You may notice a little green chutney, little dollops of green on your plate. That's my secret ingredient on the plate. Have you tasted it? Do you like it? It's bright. It's sort of intense. A little bit goes a long way. So this is what I've in the past called core values chutney. In the book, it's called salsa verde, signature salsa verde. But in the past, I've made other versions of it, and I've named it Core Values Chutney. For the Beard Foundation, I submitted 3 recipes for their Waste Not cookbook, and one of them was my Core Values Chutney recipe. You'll find it in the Beard Foundation book. It is meant to be a catch-all for all sorts of things that would normally be scraps from vegetable prep, right? So the hearts of cauliflower, the hearts of broccoli, the stems of collard greens, etc., etc., etc. Blanch them, cool them, chop them up roughly, and then do this. In a food processor, I'm not going to show that to you because you know how to do something in a food processor. In a food processor goes these ingredients. Ginger garlic, fresh citrus. Now, when you make ceviche, when you make citrus cured anything or crudo, should be the first step if you use garlic at all. When you put garlic in citrus juice, it tempers the flavor. It's cooking it chemically. Chemistry is happening, right? So I like to use ginger and garlic obsessively, but in a balanced way, hopefully. And when I put that in fresh citrus juice and let it sit there for maybe 5 minutes, you can drink this and you would not taste raw garlic because that citrus has cooked the garlic and it tempers the flavor entirely. It rounds it all out. So this first step is fresh citrus juice, lime juice, equal parts lime juice, orange juice, lemon juice. Equal parts. To your liking. How much? To your liking. I like a lot. Ginger and garlic. Some kind of a hot pepper. Jalapeno if it's hot. Otherwise add more. And now, this is the secret ingredient. Crumbed cashew nuts. Take roasted cashew nuts and just crumb them first. Not whole, but just crumb them. So crumbed cashew nuts. And now for all the greens. Any green you want. Those cores of vegetables I talked about. Fresh herbs that are wilting, that are kind of going. You think, oh, I can't use that. I got to put it in the compost bin. Don't. Put it in your core values chutney every time. So in here I have the stems of basil and the leaves of basil, cilantro, parsley, tarragon, anything you wish. Anything you wish, as much as you wish. All of this with a little salt, some honey, little bit of olive oil. That's it. Put that in a food processor. Fuss over it for about 2 minutes. Make sure the consistency is there. Make sure it's actually moving. Make sure it's turning. Taste it as you go. Add more chilies if you like more heat. Add more acidity if you like more acidity. Add some more honey if you want to balance the acidity. Within 5 minutes, you have a condiment that sits in the fridge for at least a week. And I think Denise can attest to this because I made this yesterday. It's fantastic on a wide array of things. Hopefully you enjoy the flavor that's on the plate. So now imagine that being in a burger, on fresh fish, tossed in roasted vegetables, in a taco, etc., etc. So that fresh condiment, which is so easy to make, and is so good for you, and it's so vibrant, and it's so bright, is better than the traditional, in my opinion, salsa verde that you find in Italian cuisine or even French cuisine or Spanish cuisine. Because those versions are more along the lines of a chimichurri. You know, lots of parsley, lots of olive oil, lots of garlic, and some citrus. So 4 ingredients. But I'm asking you to add about 6 or 7 more. Add some ginger. Add some heat. Add the stems of things. Add the cores of things. Add some cashew nuts. Add some honey to balance. And now you've got an entirely different thing with the same idea. It's just processed in a food processor. Was it good? Thank you. So that's the last ingredient. And so with your permission, I'll plate what it would look like in this composed way. So you start with a little bit of that masala cream. A little bit of Masara Farm collard greens. Wonderful baby turnip with the stem on. Did you find one on yours? Some farro cooked with garlic chives and rhubarb. Imagine that this was baked. A little bit of core values chutney. A dusting of spiced sugar. The spice in the sugar is simply cardamom and cinnamon. And that's it, cardamom and cinnamon. Traditional B'steeya always comes with a sprinkling of fresh powdered sugar. Always. And then last but not least, some micro broccoli from the M Street Market down the street. So this is an unbaked version of a Sinfully Vegetarian B'steeya with all of those components that you're tasting. So I'm here to answer any questions you may have, but that's the idea.